everyone. I'm Atira Minuddin, and you are listening to Palestinian Diaries podcast. And today I am joined with Puan Sri Norma Hashim. She is the renowned author of books on Palestinian affairs, and she has published not only one but 3 books on Palestinian experience being imprisoned and oppressed. And she wrote the book The Prisoner's Diaries, Dreaming of Freedom and a Shared Struggle. How are you, Puan Sri? Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Assalamualaikum. Alhamdulillah, I'm well. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, and we have another guest on our podcast, all the way from Turkey. We have Yusuf Al-Jamal. He is the translator of the books that Puan Sri has published. How are you, Yusuf?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having us today.
Thank you for joining us. So today we are going to focus on the first book that you published, The Prisoner's Diaries. It's a moving series of first-person commentaries on what Palestinian prisoners have endured for decades with the unlawful and inhuman network of prisons. And before we start, we just want to know a little bit of Puan Sri, your background on how did you get involved with the Palestinian issues?
Oh, I was an activist for Palestine since the attacks on Gaza in 2008 to 2009, when Israel bombed Gaza severely. And I'm still with Viva Palestina Malaysia, and we were having many projects of relief to help the people who had lost their homes and who had lost their livelihood. So as a result of communicating with the Palestinians, like almost every day in Gaza, one day, I got to know them quite well. And one day, Dr. Mahmoud, who was head of the Center for Political and Development Studies in Gaza, he mentioned to me that there was a collection of stories they had done of prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, who had just been released as part of this exchange for one Israeli soldier. It was 1,027 prisoners exchanged for one Israeli soldier. And some of these prisoners had given interviews to journalists telling their stories. So he sent that to me, and I was very moved by these stories. I had never heard of this issue of Palestinian prisoners, because it's something that people outside of Palestine don't know about. Yeah.
And for you, Yusuf, how did you came to know on these issues yourself? Because I understand that you are one of those people who got those information and those letters, right? What else do you do?
So, the issue of Palestinian political prisoners is, people outside Palestine do not know about the issue of Palestinian political prisoners, or their knowledge is limited. But in Palestine, it's a very popular issue, and every single family was impacted by, the issue of detention and imprisonment by Israel. Every single family had someone who was detained for various periods of time. So I was working as a translator at CBDS that Norba just mentioned, and we had the stories through Palestinian journalists. The stories were published in Arabic. As I said, like the literature on Palestinian political prisoners is very rich in Arabic, but not in other foreign languages. So I co-translated the stories with Ra'id Qadura, my friend, who also graduated from Malaysia, and now he's back in Gaza. And we sent them to Dr. Mahmoud, who conveyed these stories to Norma, and we took it from there. I thought the stories were impressive, and the experiences of these political prisoners needed to be shared with the outside world. People need to know about their stories and their struggles and their aspirations. So we got them translated, and Norma took care of the rest. She got an editor and a designer and a publishing house, and we finally were able to publish them.
Yeah, that's the interesting part. We want to how did you guys end up knowing each other? Because you were all the way in Turkey, so
in Gaza.
in Gaza. You were in Gaza.
Yes.
So how did you guys know each other?
Well, after Dr. Mahmoud sent me the stories, and at first I felt not qualified to put them in a book or to publish them, because I'm not I'm not an author or a writer. I'm an accountant. I was like, I'm treasurer of Viva Palestine, so I'm just dealing with financial matters. But however, once I read the stories, when people say once you know things, is you can't unknow them. When I read them, I felt this. They were so moving, and something that really moved me. I felt that people needed to know about, because people don't realize how much sacrifice the Palestinians have gone through for the sake of their land. And in fact, Palestine and Al-Aqsa is an issue that affects all Muslims in the world. We all have a responsibility, but yet these are the people being put in prison, being tortured, and being killed for this, and they have to do it by themselves. So I felt that there was a responsibility I could not ignore here, and I think people needed to know the stories of how much they have had to give up and how much they've suffered for freedom of their land, which is also our responsibility as Muslims. So I decided to just find out. I had to talk to so many people to find out about this process of coming out with a book, because these stories had not been published and were not done in English even, because previously all prisoner stories have been in Arabic, not translated. So Yusuf and Riot did a good job of translating it, but I had to take it further. I got an editor who is someone who had graduated from Cambridge, first class in English, to put it in the kind of the language that Westerners would understand. I felt that the audience we had to reach was in the West, because
Why is that?
Because of course the Israeli occupation, is funded by the Americans to the tune of $4 billion a year, maybe more. And there's a lot of support given by the UK, by Europe to Israel. They think that this is what you call the democracy in the Middle East, but it's nonsense, obviously, the way that they treat Palestinians, the apartheid ways that go on there. So anyway, I felt I had to do things. So I spoke to a lot of people. I wrote a lot of emails, and basically I had to find someone who would publish it. It was not easy. In the end, it was kind of the first round. I was self-published by me, and I found a printing company as well, and I found a person to design the cover who was actually a Malaysian Chinese boy. But then after a short while, it was actually picked up by a UK NGO, and it was published by them, and it turned out to be their best-selling book on Palestine in the UK as well. So it turned out to be a good thing. There was a lot of effort involved, though.
It seems like a really big process
It
that you
was,
had
it
to went through,
was,
even though it sounds like as if you're just translating
it's
these
a
stories,
little book, yes,
gathering
it seems like a book,
stories.
yeah, but it was a lot of work. I was sleeping at 3 a.m. every night for a long time, and I was speaking to Yusuf every single day.
How
so
was,
much
how was
communication.
the translating process for you, Yusuf? Did you maybe got in trouble, or maybe there were problems with the Israel authorities?
There were a lot of metaphorical expressions and poetic language. This is Arabic, and it's a very rich language. And it was a challenge to convey the meaning in English in a way that also um, protect and keep the original text. So we had a lot of expressions like that, poetic language, and very specific and cultural expressions that we try to convey. For example, the story of Nail al-Barouthi, and how cactus, for example, in Palestine is a symbol of patience. So he says, we have eaten cactus. That is like, even we have eaten patience. And I tried to convey this meaning to the readers so that they understand that like there is no patience beyond that point, because he spent now like 40 years in jail, and he was trying to convey the meaning that even the walls around him, the doors of the prison have changed twice, and he's still in jail. And he was released in 2011, and he was rearrested again in 2014, and he's still in Israeli jails. So these are very unique and deep experiences. And Arabic is a very rich language, as I said, and it can convey these stories. But the challenge was to translate this into English in a way that sounds English, but also uh, convey the original meaning and use the expressions used in Arabic. But with having so many people involved and an editor, also many people read the text. We were able to come to a conclusion or a middle ground that both kept the original meaning and the metaphorical and poetic language used in by these prisoners, and also read very well in English. Many of these prisoners actually are also poets or can write poetry or read, much literature from different parts of the world. So their expression and their ability to write in Arabic is very sophisticated, and we wanted to convey that as well.
Yeah.
Since you got the first-hand experience, at the letters and everything, did you face any problems with Israeli authorities when their stories came to light?
Not really. So, as Norma mentioned, we were based in Gaza at the time, and we do not have direct Israeli military presence. Also, the book was reprinted later in Arabic,
In Lebanon.
and some of these copies, made it to the West Bank. Other books also were reprinted and republished in the West Bank itself in Jerusalem, such as The Dreaming of Freedom, which we will talk about later. So we did not face any problem of this kind. But again, the fact that Palestinians are scattered, we had prisoners from different towns in Palestine, from Gaza and the West Bank. So we had to get different people, different journalists who live in different geographies, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, to interview the prisoners. And that was a challenge. We couldn't meet the prisoners in person. And much of these, interviews were done over the phone. But in a way, we were able to finish the project and get the stories out. But again, the issue of fragmentation and separation of Palestinians living under Israel's military occupation was a challenge. But yeah, it was doable. It was something that we were able to overcome eventually.
And the fact that Yusuf mentioned that one of the prisoners were released and then he was arrested again, and you mentioned
Even the
that
other
to
one,
me
yeah,
before, yeah.
Ala Bazian was
And
also
so you're saying there's a lot can change in the span of just a few years,
Oh, yeah.
and the prisoners' diaries were published like
2013.
2013. That's 10 years ago.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure there's a lot has changed since then. So we want to know, has there been any difference in the situation of Palestinians that are under Israeli occupation now?
Oh, I think actually, in terms of prisoners, the number of prisoners is still the same, isn't it, Yusuf? It's still about 4,000 people, 4,000 political prisoners still in Israeli jails. The number of children from the time I started on this is probably increased. Now it's about 300 to 400, I think, children in prison. It was actually more during, there was an intifada a couple of years back, and the number of child prisoners had actually gone up as they arrested more children. The situation now is not better. In fact, it's more violent. Last year, a record number of Palestinians were killed, including children. I think 50 children were killed last year by Israeli soldiers and settlers. They were shot with live ammunition, and the bullets would explode in their stomach when they were killed, when they were shot.
This is horrible.
Which, yes, of course, massive internal bleeding. That's how children die. Palestinian children are killed in Israeli, under Israeli occupation. So things have not improved, but the awareness has increased a lot. So a lot of people now are talking about this. They're talking about why are children in prison. In the US, they are questioning why are US taxpayers' funds used to detain children and torture them. So there's now a lot more discussion on social media everywhere about the issue of political prisoners.
Has the awareness somehow impact the situation there, you think?
I don't know. What do you think, Yusuf?
What do you think, Yusuf?
I mean, the situation is getting worse, unfortunately, for Palestinians, especially with this new Israeli government made of
Right-wing government now, yeah.
ex-convicts, people who were detained and banned from political life in the past. Not to say that the previous Israeli governments were better on Palestine. They have always been horrible, but this right-wing government is very vocal and clear about its intention of displacing Palestinians and killing more of them. Actually, they're rewarding Israeli soldiers who are and killing Palestinians. And we've seen more Palestinian arrests by Israel, for example, more house demolitions and more sanctions on Palestinians and their freedom to move, their ability to build or obtain permits to build houses, while at the same time this Israeli government is encouraging settlements, even in Hebron, at the heart of the West Bank, in Jerusalem, incursions into Nablus, and provoking Palestinians and killing Palestinians in Jenin and Nablus almost on daily basis. This is the situation, and this means that more arrests. We have hundreds of Palestinians who were arrested over the past 6 months, and the number of Palestinians arrested by Israel is increasing, including those who are placed under administrative detention, which is a British law that allows Israel to detain Palestinians without charge or trial for an indefinite period of time. And that's why many Palestinian prisoners, for example, go on hunger strike. They want to know why they are arrested and for how long. And this is, I think, a basic so this is the situation. But again, the resilience of the Palestinian people, Sumud, is also increasing. Palestinians are not leaving. The number of Palestinians is also increasing. The Palestinians between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean is more than Israeli Jews now. And this creates an apartheid reality that even the UN is talking about today, after Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International did so. So on the long term, I think Palestinians are winning. More people are aware, especially now with social media, and Israel cannot defend this reality.
Yeah.
And okay, and I don't know if whether you or Yusuf could answer this, but is there any prisoners that sent in the letter who has been released, but now they are back in prison?
Oh yeah, yes, like she mentioned, Nail Barghouti, Ala Al-Bazian was featured in your story. Many others actually, many others have been rearrested. It's like they made an agreement to release them in exchange for one Israeli soldier, but they went back on their agreement and rearrested the prisoners. So this is how the Israelis are. Their policies
So they're just
are,
going in circles.
their word is not something that's binding for them. Yes.
And
yes.
what were their reaction when they saw their letters were being published in the books? Were they happy? Were they sad? How was their
they
reaction?
were proud. They were very happy to see their stories published and read by people around the world. I think recognition gives them some kind of how you say more confidence in their more strength in their resistance, to know that the outside world knows about it and they're not alone. This is important for us to do. Yeah.
And how about you, Yusuf? Have you met any of the prisoners since the book was published?
Yeah, I think I did meet some of them, and as Norma said, they were proud and happy that people care about their cause. They think that they're kept in prisons, behind the walls, that no one cares about them. And this is, the feeling that Israel wants them to have. For example, they deny them family visits, or, their ability or access to their lawyers is limited. Um, so they do not know much about the outside world. They went on hunger strike so that they could have a 15-minute talk to their family on weekly basis, or to be able to watch some TV channels, or to have radios, even like these basic, human rights. So they do not have much connection with the outside world. And Israel wants to make them feel that they are in limbo, that no one cares about them. So when they see that there are people who care about them, that there's, solidarity with them, this gives, this boosts their morals in a way, and encourages them to continue the struggle. We've seen with the story of 6 Palestinians who made it out of an Israeli tunnel. I mean, who dug a tunnel out of an Israeli prison and made their way out in September last year. The huge amount of solidarity they received, and despite the fact that they were punished for that, and they used a spoon over the span of 9 months to dig this tunnel, which was a miracle that looked like prison break, but it happened. But again, the solidarity they received and the support from Palestinians and non-Palestinians have boosted their morals and encouraged them. So I think solidarity is important, and you know, telling these prisoners that there are people who care about them. We shared the book with every single prisoner and their family so that they know what we did, including other books that we also worked on that we'll be talking about later. And I think this is very important for people to know that there are people who care about them and support their cause.
Yeah, at least showing support means a lot to these people who are
Yes.
going through the most horrible experience. I cannot imagine if I could even last a day in their shoes.
Yeah.
And the fact that you mentioned earlier about Ala al-Bazian,
Yeah.
and we also read about Kahira al-Sadi. She shared her story the day my children were scattered. And just to give you a gist, Kahira was in prison for many, many years, and she was separated from her children, her four of her children,
Yes,
right? Two sons and two daughters.
Yeah.
And the fact that she
From the moment she was arrested, she did not know what happened to them because, as Yusuf mentioned, they're completely shut out from the world. So imagine as a mother, you've been taken away one day, and from that moment on, you've not heard anything about your children. You don't know where they are.
you don't know if they're alive or they've been captured.
Where they went, So, yeah, that was a very sad story, but it has a happy ending. Eventually, she was released.
So
But,
where is Kahira now? Is she freed and with her children?
Yes, she's freed already. We haven't been able to follow up on her yet, right, Yusuf?
Yeah. Yeah, she's free now. But again, these prisoners, for example, when they're in jail away from their families, especially if they have families, they try to compensate the time they lost away from their family when they're released. So they spend much of their time with their families, and they also they're humans and they have responsibilities towards their families and children. But for Ian, as Norma mentioned, he was rearrested in 2014 as part of a campaign in which Israel arrested 40 Palestinians who were released in the 2012 prisoner swap with Hamas. And he's in jail and he's blind, but he was able to get married when he was released for almost like 3 years. But again, we also have many other stories. This is just like, the stories we have in the book is an example of what is happening. Or in the number of Palestinians who were arrested by Israel since 1967 is over 1 million. So we have 1 million stories of Palestinian political prisoners.
And this is just
We only conveyed the, 23, 24 stories in this book. Just an example. For example, the story of Isra al-Ja'bis, 37 years old. She was arrested because she was accused by Israel that she was trying to attack a group of soldiers while she was in her own car. But then there also the different narrative by her and her family that her car caught fire and she was not able to leave and she was asking for help, and then they kept her inside and she was burned inside, and after that they even prevented her from having access to medical care, and she has family too, she has children, and she had so much fears about the way her child will react when he sees her for the first time, because her face has changed a lot because of these parents. And she's still in jail. She was sentenced to 15 years in jail. She has a lot of, challenges medically. She needs medical care, but Israel doesn't give her any medical care.
Ponsri, could you help us, the listeners and the viewers, understand even more that people who have been captured, there's no basis or grounds on why they are being arrested, right?
Yes, well, because sometimes they participate in demonstrations, anything to do with resistance, which obviously you would, because if somebody comes to take your land away or to demolish your homes, to arrest your children on the way to school, you would naturally not, of course, be supportive of the
Yeah.
occupation, and you would do everything you can for your freedom of the land. So anything like writing, a lot of writers also get put in prison, journalists get put in prison. Anything that the Israelis don't like when you do it, they throw you in prison. Sometimes they throw you without charge because they just don't like what you do, but there's no genuine charge to charge you with. So they put you under administrative detention,
Okay.
which means that you're in jail for no reason, no charge. And that's why a lot of prisoners, political prisoners, they go on hunger strike to protest. Why are you putting me in prison for no reason, and you can't even bring me to trial? So only to the extent that when they go on hunger strike and they are like in a really bad condition, Israel might suddenly decide to release them. So it's very cruel.
But is it effective though to do a hunger strike? Because I saw that happen quite a few years ago as
Oh yes,
well.
many hunger strikes it's like it's been done many times. Sometimes single, and sometimes a mass hunger strike. But it's like Yusuf had mentioned, you go on hunger strike even to demand the most basic things, like the right for your family to visit you. These prisoners
Yeah.
sometimes haven't seen a family for years, or they have regular visits which have been cut off. So sometimes they have to go on hunger strike to get even basic human rights, like even education. They won't have access to education when they're in prison, and Israel doesn't allow it. They have to go on a hunger strike and then to demand these things, which are trivial, but they have to use their body as a weapon because this is the only thing they have.
Yeah,
you
because
know?
I saw one of the stories in the
Yeah.
book that this man was in prison when he was younger, and the day that he got to meet his mother was already old, and he was older, and they don't even recognize each other, which is very, very sad. And I don't think people out there really understand the circumstances that they had to went through.
Yes, the lives are
torture.
stolen. Yeah, yes. I think Karim Yunis, for instance, was one prisoner, was longest serving prisoner. After 40 years, he was just released a few weeks ago. And during that time, his mother had just passed away, before he was released. You know how heartbreaking that is. She had waited for him so long, and they're prisoners where during the time of Ramadan, their mother would keep a share for them, hoping that one
Just
day
in
they'll be back to,
case.
yeah. Yes. A lot of heartbreaking stories. Children who grow up without their fathers, who didn't know them, and the father had never seen them because he was in prison. Yeah.
How
big
old was this
sacrifice.
man?
Which one?
The one that you mentioned that just
Karim
got
Yunis
released
was,
40
I
years
think
ago?
he was arrested when he was a student at university. When he was 19, so 40 years later. He's 60, 59, 60.
Do you know the man, Yusuf?
Yeah, I know his story is not in the book. He was 23 years old, and when he was released, he was 63.
Ah,
63.
yeah.
His future just got ripped
Yes.
away from him.
Yes.
Yeah.
From university until like retirement age, right?
How is he doing now, Yusuf?
I mean, he's trying to adjust to life now. A lot of things have changed. Social media, life, I mean, the streets, infrastructure, family, like, seeing all these kids that he never saw in his life from his extended family, maybe like trying to establish a new life. So, he's just adjusting to life outside the prison. He says, this is like the first time I see the sky without fences. To see trees, he said, to touch children. This is something that he never, did in the past 40 years. So it takes time for the prisoners, especially those who serve a long time, to get used to a new life outside the prison when they go out, especially like with technology. Imagine if someone was like, imprisoned 15 years ago or 10 years ago. A lot of things have changed, like social media is changing every day. So like prisoners do not know how they're used, for example, to watching specific channels on TV. And I know another prisoner who had to argue with his kids when he was released because he's used to watching one TV channel, but then they also want to watch other channels. These are just like basic things, but it's also indicative of, the impact of imprisonment on these prisoners.
These are the experience that we know from adults. But Yusuf, could you maybe share with us like how does this imprisonment impact the children who were captured when they were kids and they were released? Maybe they were already adults, maybe teenagers. how are they dealing with post-imprisonment?
So we have the story of Palestinian child prisoner Ahmed Manasra. He was 13 years old when he was arrested, and he was placed under solitary confinement for a long time. Now he has serious psychological problems. Israel claims that they keep him in solitary confinement because it's quote unquote better for him because of his psychological condition. But his psychological condition has come to existence is because he was placed under solitary confinement. And his family has been calling for his release. There were many court sessions held to try to get him out after serving two-thirds of the imprisonment or the sentence he was given. But these Israeli courts and judges have refused to release him, and he's still in jail. And I mean, if he stays in jail under these conditions, and we know his situation right now, there is a very big chance that he might lose his mind, which happened to other prisoners too. There was also a prisoner who completely lost his mind in Israeli jails. So a lot of people find difficulties, when they're released in terms of their ability to adapt to new life, or if they are kids, they cannot go back to school again. They have nightmares and other challenges, and try to learn a new job, a new profession, so that they can excel in life. It's really difficult.
I can't imagine like a lot of the psychotic break, the PTSD that they had to
Yeah.
endure the
A
whole
lot of
time
kids
they
can't
were.
adjust.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trauma. If you read the second book, Dreaming of Freedom, you'll find a lot of them find they cannot go back to school. They're embarrassed because they've lost, say, 1 or 2 years in school and they cannot catch up with their peers.
Yeah.
In the case of Ahmad Manasra, it's very tragic. From the age of 13, if you put a child who's 13 years old in solitary confinement in a small dark hole in the ground, can you imagine what it does to his mind? He cannot see his mother, his family for...
He must have been
Yeah,
so scared.
yes. And now he's 21 and still in prison and very badly affected psychologically as well. He should be released because, as a child, how can you charge a child with any offense? What the Israelis did was, when he was 13 and he was arrested, they waited a year till he was 14 to charge him, because at the age of 14, under Israeli law, you can actually charge them like an adult. You see, they actually held him a year.
For nothing.
Yes, so that
Just
they
wait.
can make sure they could charge him and sentence him to a long sentence. So this is what they do to children. It's very brutal, very cruel.
They should
Yes.
They should be out with their friends, learning,
Yes, so the
getting
lives
the
are destroyed.
education.
Yeah, even though if they come out at 20 or whatever, but their whole life ahead of them. But it's already they are severely traumatized. Yes, that's
And
right.
as I can see, there's so many untold stories.
Oh, many, yes.
So
Some
many.
people cannot speak
And
about it. A lot of people
yeah.
cannot. They don't want to speak about it because it's something they want to put behind them. So we can't force people to tell their stories.
And
Yeah.
what other stories that maybe we can expect in the upcoming Palestinian Diaries column? Because we understand that apart from the podcast, we are also expecting some stories from you and maybe from Yusuf as well. What other stories could we expect?
I think we've lost Yusuf. Is he still there?
Yusuf, are you still there?
Oh, you're there. Okay. I was thinking to feature Nail Barghouti's story. He's also a very long-serving prisoner, already 40 years in prison, and his story is in the prisoner's diaries. Maybe the other story, maybe one of the child prisoners, like Yazan al-Shirbati, maybe the one he's called the child of Shuhada Street. Shuhada Street in Hebron has been taken over by the Israeli settlers, and he's one person. Some of the families hold on and don't want to leave, but they are subjected to daily violence by living there. So maybe we will put in Yazan's story.
Is it like you have to maybe talk to them to get more details on the story, or how is it going to be?
For the child prisoners, they're all in the West Bank. Yusuf was in Gaza, but we do have a reporter in the West Bank who has gone to interview the children and to meet them. So that's how we got the stories for the second book. Yeah.
And maybe just a last question before we are running out of time. We want to hear Yusuf. Apart from you translating these stories to give awareness globally to other, maybe to the West as well, what other expectation do you have from bringing awareness on this issue?
I mean, bringing about change is important, and there was a bill in the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress um, calling on the U.S. government to link aid given to Israel to its treatment of Palestinian child prisoners. And there was a campaign called No Way to Treat a Child. And I was at the US Congress, and the child prisoners book, Dreaming of Freedom, was reprinted in the US. And we gave copies to different Congress people of the book so that they sign into this bill. So we need to bring about political change. Awareness is important, but also the fact that this occupation has been going on for 74 years, and we need to take actions to support Palestinians on the ground. I mean, aid is no longer a question because it's going to help Palestinians, but it's not going to end their suffering. So we need political action that will give Palestinians the right to self-determination and live in freedom, so that these children, these women and men will not have to be arrested again, uh, just to live a free life in their, own country. So this is what we need: political change.
Okay. And as for you, Pansri,
Well,
what other things do you expect?
we all know that the Western media has manipulated stories about Palestine for many, many years. So my purpose for doing the books also was to give Palestinians a voice as well, for the rest of the world to hear Palestinian narratives, their own stories in their own words, which is exactly what the books are about. There was an African writer, Chinua Achebe, when he said that the history of the hunt, he said, until lions can write their own stories, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter, as in the case. So
Yeah.
the Palestinians must have their own stories out there.
Yes.
Otherwise, all you hear will be the narratives
One side of the story.
of the occupier, which will always glorify and
Yes.
promote the Zionist cause. So this is important, and that's my purpose.
And I
Yes.
think we have lost Yusuf on the Zoom meeting, but that's okay. We are already at the end of
Yes.
our first episode of podcast, and I'm
Yes.
pretty sure the listeners and the viewers have a lot more questions to ask, and I have many more stories that I want to hear from you as well. But that is it for the first episode of Palestinian Diaries podcast. We just want to give you a glimpse of how the Prisoner's Diary started. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Puan
very
Norma, for coming here and joining for our podcast. And I can't wait to hear more stories from you and from Yusuf, who tune in all the way from Turkey. And for those who are watching and those who are listening to our podcast, for the latest updates on the upcoming episodes, make sure to follow Sinar Daily MY on all of our social media platforms. We have our TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and also to get your latest news, log on to sinardaily.my. And I'm Atira Minuddin, and I hope to see you all next week, next episode. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.